Imagine you're riding a school bus at night, the eerie silence broken only by the hum of the engine. The night seems ordinary until you feel a cold chill and something feels off. Your heart races and you can't shake the feeling that something is watching you. In today's video, we'll share 3 terrifying school bus encounters that are sure to make you rethink your next ride. Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we've got 3 spine-chilling school bus encounters that will make you think twice about your daily ride. Get ready for stories of creepy passengers, eerie figures, and a driver with a dark secret. Let's dive in. Story 1, The Silent Passenger by Kayla Renshaw. My name is Kayla Renshaw, and I'll never forget the unsettling encounter I had during my junior year of high school. I grew up in a small town, and everything was always predictable. Until one morning when the bus ride turned into something I'll never be able to explain. It was early November, and the sun was still hidden behind a thick blanket of clouds. I was one of the first students to board the bus as usual. The morning chill made me shiver as I climbed up the steps and found my seat near the back. Our bus driver, Mr. Denny, was unusually quiet that morning, and when I greeted him, he simply nodded without his usual friendly smile. As the bus began to make its usual route, I noticed something strange. There was a girl sitting in the very last row of the bus, someone I didn't recognize. Her head was bowed, her long dark hair obscuring her face. I tried to catch a glimpse of her features, but it was as if she was intentionally hiding. At first, I assumed she was just a new student who had recently moved to town, but something about the whole situation felt off. The bus was filled with the usual chatter, but no one else seemed to acknowledge the girl. No one asked her name, and no one seemed curious. I turned to my friend Jenny, who was sitting beside me. "Do you know who that is?" I asked, pointing to the girl in the back. Jenny looked over, but her face twisted in confusion. "What girl?" she replied. I stared at the back row, my heart starting to race. I could clearly see the girl sitting there, but Jenny didn't seem to see her at all. I tried to brush it off, convincing myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. Maybe I was still tired, or maybe it was just the eerie atmosphere of the early morning. But when the bus made its next stop, I looked again. The girl was still there, unmoving, her head still lowered. As the bus continued its route, I kept glancing at the last row. The girl never moved. Her presence felt heavy, like she was watching me. But when I tried to make eye contact, she wouldn't lift her head. The silence around her was almost suffocating, and I began to feel like I was trapped in a nightmare. Finally, we reached the school. As the bus came to a stop, I waited, hoping the girl would get off. But she didn't. She stayed in her seat, staring down at the floor. I looked around at the other students, but no one seemed to notice. The bus doors opened, and one by one, my classmates got off. But when I reached the door, I turned to look back. The girl was still sitting there, motionless. I stepped off the bus, my feet heavy as I walked toward the school entrance. But just as I reached the doors, I heard a faint whisper behind me. "Don't forget me." I spun around, but there was no one there. I was alone in the parking lot, except for the school bus, which was now pulling away. I ran inside, my heart pounding in my chest. That day, I told my friends about the strange girl on the bus, but no one seemed to remember her. No one could recall seeing her. Jenny still insisted there had been no one in the back row. I began to doubt myself, questioning whether I had imagined the whole thing. But the next morning, when I boarded the bus, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. As I stepped on, I glanced toward the back row, and there she was again, sitting perfectly still, her long hair covering her face. I tried to ignore her presence, but the unease in my chest grew. The other students didn't acknowledge her, and I didn't dare to ask. Every time I glanced back, I could feel her eyes following me, though her face remained hidden. It wasn't until weeks later that I finally told my parents. I had been avoiding the back of the bus, convinced that something wasn't right. They were concerned but didn't take me seriously. "You're just stressed, Kayla," my mom said. But I knew what I saw and what I felt. Then one day I saw something that chilled me to the bone. I was sitting near the front of the bus when I looked out the window. As the bus made its way down the road, I saw the girl standing by the side of the road, watching the bus drive by. Her eyes locked with mine, and a cold shiver ran through me. I told Mr. Denny about the girl again, but he just shrugged it off. "Kayla, no one's on the bus after you," he said, a little concerned but dismissive. To this day, I still don't know who she was or why she was on the bus. I can't help but feel that she's still watching me, waiting. Sometimes I wonder if she was never really there at all, or if she was a warning of something darker lurking just beyond my reach. Story 2, The Haunting of Bus 27, by Lucas Price. My name is Lucas Price, and I'll never forget the day I encountered something truly strange on Bus 27. It all started on a cold October morning when I boarded the bus as usual, ready to start another day of school. The ride had become routine for me, but this day would change everything. The fog outside the bus windows made the morning feel eerie. The usual chatter from my classmates filled the air, but there was a different kind of tension in the bus that day. As I made my way to the back, I noticed a new student sitting by himself. He had messy hair and a thick black jacket. What struck me most, though, were his eyes, wide, unblinking, and unsettling. I tried not to stare, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He didn't look like the kind of person who would be at my school. He had a strange presence about him, almost as if he didn't belong in this world. I sat down and looked out the window, but my mind kept wandering back to him. His eyes followed me, locked on mine, and it felt like he was watching my every move. The ride to school seemed to drag on. I tried to ignore him, but his stare made the air feel heavy, like something was lurking just beyond my sight. The bus rattled along the road, but every bump in the pavement made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I kept glancing over at him, and every time he was staring back at me. It was like we were the only two people on the bus. When the bus reached the school, I stood up to leave, but I hesitated for a moment. As I walked past the new kid, I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. He whispered, "Don't forget me," his voice raspy and unnatural. I froze. I couldn't explain it, but there was something about the way he spoke that sent a wave of dread through me. I didn't know what to say. I quickly left the bus, not daring to look back. The next day, I boarded the bus again, trying to push the unease aside. But when I reached the back, there he was, sitting in the same spot, his eyes locked on me once again. The air felt thick, suffocating. I tried to ignore him, but his gaze made it impossible. Every bump on the road seemed to amplify the tension in the air. I couldn't look away, and it felt like I was trapped in some kind of twisted staring contest. I tried to distract myself by looking at my phone, but I could still feel his presence. It was like he was sitting right next to me, his eyes boring into the side of my head. The ride felt longer than usual, and I couldn't wait to get off. When the bus finally pulled into the school parking lot, I bolted out of my seat and rushed off the bus, looking over my shoulder. I didn't see him the next day, or the day after that. I thought maybe he had just been a figment of my imagination, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. I asked around at school, but no one knew anything about him. No one had seen a new student matching his description. Even the bus driver didn't remember anyone fitting his appearance. I couldn't let it go. The boy's eyes haunted me, and I started to feel like I was losing my mind. Was he real, or had I imagined the whole thing? Then one afternoon, as I walked home from school, I passed by the old cemetery near my house. The fog was thick, and the air was colder than usual. That's when I saw him, standing by the gate of the cemetery, staring directly at me. His eyes locked with mine, and in that moment, I knew he wasn't just some weird kid on the bus. He was something more, something I couldn't understand. "Don't forget me," he whispered, his voice barely audible in the thick fog. Then without another word, he turned and walked into the cemetery. I never saw him again after that day, but I can't shake the feeling that he's still out there, watching me. His eyes, his words, they linger in my mind, a reminder of that unsettling encounter. And to this day, I avoid Bus 27 and the old cemetery, because I know somewhere out there, he's waiting for me to forget, so he can remind me again. Story 3, The Phantom Rider by Thomas Graves. My name is Thomas Graves, and I'll never forget the night I experienced something terrifying on my school bus. It was the fall of my sophomore year, and I was riding home after a long day. The weather had been strange that day, with dark clouds hanging overhead and a chill in the air. By the time I boarded the bus, the skies were already dark, and the roads were slick with rain. I found my usual seat near the back, But there was something off about the bus that day. The usual chatter was absent, and everyone seemed unusually quiet. The bus driver, Mr. Thompson, was a kind older man who usually had a smile for everyone. But today he looked distracted, his eyes darting around as if he were expecting something or someone. As the bus pulled away from the school, I noticed a new kid sitting in the seat across from mine. He was dressed in a long black coat and had an unsettling aura about him. His face was pale, his hair dark and messy, and his eyes, those eyes were the strangest I had ever seen. Cold, lifeless, like a person who had seen too much of the world. At first I tried to ignore him, but I couldn't help but notice that he wasn't speaking to anyone. He just stared out the window, his gaze fixed on something I couldn't see. The other kids didn't seem to acknowledge him either. It was as if he didn't belong on the bus at all. The bus began to slow down as it reached a stretch of road that led into the woods. It was a dark, desolate area, and the trees seemed to loom over the road, casting eerie shadows. The air felt heavier, as though the very atmosphere had thickened. The bus driver, Mr. Thompson, turned his head to look at the new kid. His face went pale, and his hand gripped the wheel tighter. Without warning, the bus came to a sudden stop. The lights flickered, and a low hum filled the air. The new kid didn't flinch. He simply stood up and walked down the aisle, moving with an unnatural stillness. As he passed me, I caught a glimpse of his face, and I could swear his eyes locked with mine, sending a cold shiver down my spine. He reached the door and stood there for a moment, as if waiting for something. The doors creaked open, and the night air rushed in. Without saying a word, he stepped off the bus and disappeared into the darkness. The bus remained still for a few seconds before Mr. Thompson snapped out of his trance. He muttered something under his breath, shaking his head as if trying to clear it. He then drove the bus forward, but the atmosphere had changed. The air felt thicker, and the weight of silence was suffocating. I tried to push the strange encounter from my mind, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The next day, I asked a few of my friends about the new kid, but no one knew who he was. None of the other students on the bus had seen him before, and when I asked Mr. Thompson about him, he seemed confused, claiming that there had never been anyone sitting near me. That afternoon, I decided to get off the bus a stop early, hoping to clear my head. As I walked down the street toward my house, I passed the woods where the bus had stopped, and that's when I saw him again, the same kid standing in the distance, staring at me from the edge of the trees. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. His eyes were fixed on me, unblinking, as if he was waiting for me to approach. I wanted to scream, to run, but my feet felt like they were glued to the ground. The air grew colder, and I could see my breath fogging in front of me. Suddenly, I heard a voice behind me, soft and eerie, like it came from the depths of the forest. "He's coming for you," it whispered. I turned around, but no one was there. My heart raced as I sprinted toward my house, not daring to look back. When I finally made it home, I locked the door behind me and stayed inside the rest of the night, too afraid to even peek out the window. I never saw the kid again, and I never took the bus after that. But every time I pass the woods near my old bus stop, I feel a cold chill down my spine, as if I'm being watched. To this day, I wonder if the Phantom Rider was ever really a student, or if he was something much darker, something that was always waiting for the right moment to strike. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more creepy stories. Which of these stories gave you a chilling experience? Let us know. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and remember, sometimes the scariest stories are the ones that are real.